What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be joined by Damichael Cole from Locked On Grizzlies to discuss how Ja Morant is putting up the best numbers of his career so far, and how the Memphis Grizzlies have managed to survive early season absences from both Jaren Jackson Jr., now back in the lineup, and Desmond Bane, still yet to return to the Grizzlies rotation. Why isn't Ja Morant getting more MVP buzz? What's the latest timetable on Desmond Bane? We're going to talk about all that in just a moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis this season. Get the latest odds and trends for every single professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer, even esports. They've got you covered for everything over at BetOnline.net. Right now, you can head over to BetOnline to take a look at who the odds-on favorite is to go number one overall in this year's 2023 NBA Draft. Spoiler alert, it's Victor Wembanyama at minus 1,000. But here's the funny thing. Next on the list is actually anybody other than Scoot Henderson has a plus 825 chance to go number one overall. And then Scoot Henderson is plus 1,000 to go number one overall. So for all those odds and more, be sure to visit betonline.net to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Damichael Cole, host of Locked On Grizzlies. You can follow on Twitter at DamichaelC. Now, Damichael, Grizzlies 14-9, fresh off a win against the Detroit Pistons, tied for third best in the Western Conference. Ja Morant dropping in 21 points against the Pistons in the third quarter. Just another day at the office for Ja Morant, huh?
Just another day at the office, Jackson. I mean, I just keep asking myself, what is he going to do next? What can he continue to add, from a highlight perspective? This is a guy who a lot of people say is one of the most entertaining players to watch in the NBA. And if you look at the first two quarters of that game, it's just ho-hum. He's passing the ball, getting guys involved, 7 points in the first half, then boom. He's running full speed down the court. He winds it back. He does the dunk that everyone sees. And then after the dunk, it's the crossover in the corner, the short corner and the three-pointer over Corey Joseph, who's a very high-regarded defender. And then it's the logo three-pointer, it's the alley-oop, all in one quarter. And, you hear, people say it from time to time. They say that Ja Morant's, in-game, one game of his highlights can be the equivalent of some players, full season highlight tape. How about one quarter? In this occasion, one quarter looked like a full season of highlights for some players.
Again, another day at the office for Ja Morant on his way to 33 points, 10 assists, 5 boards in the win against the Pistons. But, what's crazy to me, Damichael, is Ja's having like a career year, right? He's got career best numbers across the board. He's getting to the free throw line more. He's shooting a career best from three. His efficiency is down a little bit, across the board. Maybe not shooting the ball quite as well, like inside the 3-point line. But numbers wise, assists, points, they're all up this season. And yet it feels like he doesn't have near the same, MVP buzz that he did last season, right? You hear the name, Jason Tatum, Luka, Jokic for a third time in a row, possibly, getting more MVP buzz. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Ja's not getting kind of the flowers that maybe he deserves?
Yeah, in his case, there's more of a longevity thing that we have to see, the course of the season. People will bring up, injuries and things like that, that we've seen happen to Ja Morant. You'll remember earlier this season, he had the ankle injury and he missed, I think 2 games. He missed 2 games, but the initial timeline was week to week. Luckily, that turned out to be day to day pretty much. But I think that's what it is at this point. And, as he continues to build up that consistency over time and the Grizzlies continue to stand out, that MVP buzz will eventually come for him. And those guys that you mentioned, those are guys who have had MVP buzz pretty much, at different points of their career, and some have won, MVP before. So it's a little different, I think, for him. I think he is getting the recognition overall as a player. But when you talk about MVP, that's a whole nother conversation. And I think, we're 20, 24, 28, 23 games in right now for the Grizzlies. I think when you get closer to that 40, 50 game mark, that's when Ja Morant can kind of, really make hay in that pack.
Right now, Damichael, what's the latest kind of timetable on Desmond Bane, and just how much does this Grizzly team miss having him on the floor? I mean, he's such an important part of this organization. They were 10-2 with Bane to start the season before he eventually went down.
Yeah, Bane is I always tell people that to me, you can make an argument that he's the most valuable player in terms of when he goes down, things change the most. When Ja Morant went down last season, of course, there was the big stat everyone knew when Tyus Jones filled in as the starter. He was 19-4 in those games. The Grizzlies' assist numbers were up. The three-point shooting numbers were up. Tyus Jones is just a very efficient backup point guard to have. And then you go down to Jaren Jackson Jr. We saw earlier this season. He's missing some games. And then Santi Aldama steps in. He doesn't do, too much, but he plays well enough to complement Ja Morant and Desmond Bane to kind of, navigate things there. But when Desmond Bane went down, you're going down to John Conchar, who, is a solid player. I love what he does as a rebounder and things like that, but he's a spot-up shooter, and you're not going to get too much more than that. And Desmond Bane does so much off the dribble for this team. He does a lot as a three-point spot-up shooter and so forth. So seeing this team kind of reconfigure some things and figure out how to play without Desmond Bane, I think that's what they're doing right now. As far as the timeline, he's getting closer. I think this week is the week we'll get a firm answer on when he'll return. The last update that we got was that, he's starting to do some real small basketball activity. So not quite, one-on-one, 3-on-3, 5-on-5, but one-on zero stuff, just basically, some shooting things, some light things, and things of that nature. So basically, my prediction pretty much is that this week we'll get a more firm timeline here. And I think in the next week or two, Desmond Bane will be back.
You mentioned his name there a moment ago, Jaren Jackson Jr. He was the guy, didn't start, season opener, missed a little bit of the first chunk of the season for the Grizzlies. Made his return to the lineup, though, about midway through November. So how has he kind of looked since returning to action, returning to the court?
Yeah, Jackson, the Locked On Grizzlies people will be able to tell you this, but I heap praise on guys when it's deserved, but I'm very careful, with that. I'm very careful with it. And Jaren Jackson Jr., I'll say this is the best I've ever seen him look, personally. And it's because, he can shoot the ball, right? We know he's this stretch big man. And when he came into the league, he's shooting 38, 39, 40% from three-point range on 4 to 5 attempts. So you knew he would, make his way with that. But then the three-point efficiency started to tail off. Last season, he's shooting over 5 3-points a game, and he's only making 31% of them. It's to the point like, oh, here he is shooting these three-pointers again. But now the three-point attempts are still, sort of high, but there's more balance to this game. And there's just more realization of, look, I'm 6'11", I'm 240, 250 pounds. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going against a guy that's smaller than me, who doesn't have as much strength as me, and I can just move him out of the way. He has the skill set to play like a Pascal Siakam, like a Giannis, not, possibly like to their levels offensively, but he has that potential. Like, he really has it. And we're witnessing it. This is, 20 points, I think, or 20 or more points in 6 of his first 8 games. Mind you, he's been on a minutes restriction. I think he's only topped 30 minutes one time so far in those 8 games. So all things considered, I think this is the best he's looked. Of course, what he brings to the table defensively. We don't have to, linger on with that part of the conversation. But I think the reason this is the best he looks is because he's being more efficient. If you go back to the game against the Pistons, 7 of 13 from the field, you just didn't see too many nights like that with Jaren Jackson Jr., and it's because he's pounding the ball inside. It's leading to career-high numbers from the free throw line. It was mind-boggling to me when I first started covering the Grizzlies to see a 6'11" guy with so much skill, the ability to put the ball on the floor and only average 3-4 free throw attempts per game. But now, he's up in that 6 range, 7. I think he's going to end up in that range, and that's why you're seeing a better version of Jaren Jackson Jr. all around. I think it's going to make him an overall more efficient player, and it's going to complement the three-point and the defense that he already provides.
I like it. A renewed sense of aggressiveness out of Triple J. Now, you brought up the defense there a moment ago, Damichael. For the season, the Grizzlies are ranked just, middle of the pack, 17th defensively after, being a top 10 defense last season. And I thought, kind of a big part of that was, missing Triple J, not having his defensive impact on the court. But since Triple J has returned, they're only ranked 15th in defense since he's made it back into the lineup. So what's in your eyes kind of going on defensively this year compared to last season for the Grizzlies? Or is it all just Desmond Bane? Is Desmond Bane the anchor of the Grizzlies defense?
I think it's a lot, that you can put into this. I think if we want to focus solely on the starting lineup, I think the starting lineup is ahead of the bench. Uh, for example, when the bench comes into the game, they have not, been very good so far this season. In that group, and it's usually four guys, but there are five guys that you factor to. The main guys are Tyus Jones, Brandon Clark. Those are your two guys that you know what you're going to get. John Conchar didn't, get consistent minutes last season. He stepped into that role. Now you see he's getting some starts here and there as well. And then two rookies, David Roddy, Jake LaRavia, two first-round picks, albeit, but at the same time, two rookies. They're replacing DeAnthony Melton, Kyle Anderson. Who led the Grizzlies in steals last season? DeAnthony Melton. By the way, he's top 5 in the NBA this season in steals. Who led the Grizzlies in steals 2 seasons ago? Kyle Anderson. Those guys are last season, they were the two best Grizzlies players at getting their hands on basketballs, causing disruption. The Grizzlies led the NBA in steals last season. Of course, they led the league in blocks because they have the block panther and Jaren Jackson Jr. So all things considered here, I think the defense has kind of fell off overall because you mentioned it at the top. Jaren Jackson Jr., him being out, that kind of hurt the starting unit. Now he's back. I think he's solidifying things more with the starting unit, but there's still kind of a drop-off with the second unit, and that's going to be solidified overall, I think, over the course of time. The rookies will get better. They'll get more experience. And then you get Zaire Williams back as well, who, the Grizzlies team, the coaches are very fond of his defensive potential. So I think there is room to get better. And I think that number will get better. I mean, early on in the season, they were 28th in defensive rating. So they've kind of worked their way up, somewhat. But you're right. They have kind of like stalled in that middle of the pack range as of lately. But I think, once this team kind of gets to reconfigure that lineup some, you put John Conchar going against bench guys instead of having John Conchar guard, the top wing scorer on some occasions, when Dylan Brooks picks up 2 fouls, I think things will be fine.
Will Ja Morant start to get some more MVP buzz as the season goes on? When will Desmond Bane make his return to the Grizzlies lineup, and what impact will that have? Of course, you're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Appreciate you having me, man. Anytime.